Gentlemen, welcome back. We shall now proceed with the substance of the agenda, the workshop on international humanitarian law. The session for this panel presentation shall be on the role and mandate of the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization, which shall be presented by the ALCO Secretary General, Professor Rahmat Mohammed. Immediately thereafter, should be a presentation on the International Committee of the Red Cross and its role and mandate. And this segment shall be undertaken by Mr. Surinder Oberoi, Head of Communications, and Mr. Benjamin Wahrin, Deputy Head of Regional Delegation of the ICRC based in New Delhi. We thank the distinguished members of the panel for their time and effort, and welcome Professor Mohammed to give his presentation.
Thank you, Charles. For the second time, I'm very much privileged to make this presentation before all of you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. But I must lodge a caveat here first. As Secretary General of this 47-member state of IGO, you are rather a generalist than a specialist. So if you are going to ask me what happened in some part of the world, but I'm not the person on the ground, you perhaps can address those questions to my colleague, Mr. Benjamin, and also probably others who are actually on the ground. So what I plan to do here is to make a presentation on how much ALCO has contributed to the development of international humanitarian law, and what are the challenges. And the challenges as regard to international humanitarian law are nothing new. That has been mentioned and highlighted by my colleague, Excellency Mary Vance, in her presentation this morning. But nevertheless, as been pointed out by my colleague, Mrs. Anuradha Bakshi, that we have to keep on emphasizing, re-emphasizing the importance of these laws, the importance of this rule, particularly in time of armed conflict, so that we will not forget. Though we pretend to be forgetful, but it's good to talk about this from time to time and to remind us the time of war. What are the things that war is? Despite the fact that war is illegal, but sometimes some people say it is a necessity for whatever reason you may have. But still, in preparation of that, we as human beings, we as international organization must try to our very best to ensure that what are the safeguards, what are the protection, particularly for civilians, the non-combatants during that time. So I shall make this presentation first in relation to the role and contribution of ALCO in relation to the development of international humanitarian law and our affiliation with ICRC. Now, the topic of international humanitarian law has been included as part of ALCO agenda, along with human rights and the status and treatment of refugees, and there is a significant confluence of international humanitarian law with other mandated topics of ALCO, which has led to ALCO taking an abiding interest in the development, recognition and implementation of humanitarian principles. The work of ALCO in this respect has largely been born out of, especially in the dissemination of information to its member states, academics and students alike, in the form of conferences, workshops and seminars. As you know that we have our limitations, and what is our limitation? We are just an advisory body, just like your ICRC. So nothing more we can do beyond that. Because at the end of the day, the call is always the member state. And the topic has also been a focus of discussion at various ALCO annual sessions, which have been the active participation of representatives from the ICRC. The 4 Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols have been long a point of focus for ALCO. Of course, with ALCO urging its member state to consider becoming parties to them. Just as importantly, the ALCO has consistently worked towards encouraging member states to adopt domestic legislation to implement the rules of IHL. Of course, these very much again depend on member states, and as an international lawyer, you know the complexity and the intricacies of converting international humanitarian law into domestic requirements. Now, it depends whether the state is practicing dualism or monism. Of course, these are, I do not see this as an obstacle, rather the political will of the state, whether to ratify, to adopt those conventions at the end of the day. And the implementation of IHL through the adoption of domestic legislation and the preparation of National Action Plan is crucial to the widespread recognition and adherence to the principle of IHL, along with the formation of National Human Rights Commission. Now, ALCO is committed to the continued capacity building and institutionalization of human rights and humanitarian law, and will continue its effort in promoting the recognition in the Asian African region, as well as working towards addressing the new challenges that face the development and implementation of humanitarian law. Now, the theme of today's seminar is the contemporary challenges facing international humanitarian law. And this ever-evolving field, there are always new concerns and obstacles to be faced and overcome. The discourse on IHL needs to continually evolve due to the fact that the nature of conflict itself is evolving. And IHL needs to evolve to keep pace with these new hurdles. I will touch on some of the major concerns facing IHL that are of relevance, and over the course of this workshop, some of these topics will be delved into in much greater detail by the experts who are with us over the course of the next 2 days. And as I mentioned earlier, some of this topic has been mentioned earlier by my colleague, Ms. Marianne Owens, in her presentation this morning. Now, conflicts in the 20th century and earlier was characterized by standoff between the armed and uniformed personnel who fought for the protection or advancement of their nation with the armed forces of another state. The lines of battle were usually clearly drawn and the opponent easily identified. However, in the 21st century, the lines separating combatants and identifying them have been all but erased. The paradigm of the war between nations has largely been replaced by the so-called war on terrorism and complex conflicts within states, rather than between states. This has rendered the traditional classification of conflict as international armed conflict or non-international armed conflict increasingly inadequate. We now see forces comprised of personnel pledging allegiance to several different flags, or no flag at all. Collaborative peacekeeping forces consisting of soldiers from different countries are often tactically and strategically deployed alongside each other, complicating their operations. There is an increasing reliance on the use of private armed contractors who are not regular military personnel, The very definition of a combatant is undergoing the process of evolution due to the increased frequency of opponents being clad in plain clothes and not the uniform of regular armed force. The traditional battlefield has itself also seen drastic changes. Terrorism has moved the battlefield into cities and homes, while the increasing sophistication of technology and increasing reliance on safe technology has moved the battle from the trenches into either of cyberspace. While one of the well-known effects of war has been the stripping away of the humanity of the combatant, this has now taken place in the most literal sense with the advent of semi-autonomous aerial drones and computer viruses. It should thus be clear why the classical understanding of the laws of war as envisioned and codified in the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949 need to be reviewed and updated to fit the needs of the 21st century. Some of the broad areas that need to be examined are activities in terrorism and globalization. The phrase war on terrorism has, for better or for worse, become a catchphrase defining most modern conflicts. However, while terrorism has become a regularly featured part of the 21st century lexicon, the definition of terrorism itself, a contentious issue, thus muddling the battle against said terrorism. Terrorism is a global phenomenon that affects almost every country in the world and requires a concerted effort by all nations in cooperation to fully eradicate. The item entitled International Terrorism was placed on the agenda of ALCO's 40th session in 2002. It was felt that consideration of this item at ALCO would be useful and relevant in the context of the ongoing negotiation in the ad hoc committee of the UN on elaboration of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. The successive sessions directed the Secretariat to monitor and report on the progress in the ad hoc committee of negotiations related to the drafting of a comprehensive international convention to combat terrorism, and requested the Secretariat to carry out an in-depth study on this topic. The Center for Research and Training at ALCO brought a preliminary study on the concept of international terrorism in the year 2006. And most recently, the topic of international terrorism was deliberated upon by ALCO member states at ALCO's 51st annual session in Abuja in 2012. Here too, the importance of and pressing need for a comprehensive definition of terrorism was discussed, with the consensus among African Asian states being that such a definition needs to tie into the drafting of a comprehensive convention on terrorism. Furthermore, terrorism should not be equated with legitimate struggle of people against colonial domination or alien occupation in the pursuit of national liberation and self-determination. It is also important that terrorism should not be associated with any particular religion, culture, nationality, race, civilization, or ethnic group. Additionally, any such definition of terrorism and proposed comprehensive convention should also be able to cover new areas where terrorist acts are making an impact, such as cyber terrorism. While increasing reliance on the use of the internet and the increasing interconnectedness of information systems, cyber terrorism poses serious threat to security and must be addressed. While terrorist acts themselves have most often been the focus of legal action and legislation, the ancillary processes of terrorism must also be addressed, which is the goal that the ALCO has worked diligently toward. For instance, ALCO agenda includes the topic of corruption, challenges in combating corruption, the role of the UNCAC. Corruption and money laundering are major sources of funds for terrorism, and terrorist organization and activities. The prevention of corruptions will therefore curb acts of terrorism by cutting off their supply of funds. ALCO has worked to promote the ratification and implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption among member states as a means to begin the process of curbing corruption and thereby the funding of terrorism. With the deepening of ALCO works in the field of anti-terrorism, the question of how to properly anatomize and delineate its relationship with IHL poses an increasingly important challenge. The next challenge is participation of civilians. The principle of distinction between unarmed civilian, non-combatant and armed combatant has long been one of the cornerstones of IHL regime. However, the increased assumption of the role of combatants by civilians and irregular militias has become one of the greatest challenges facing the implementation of IHL regime. The question of who can or cannot be considered a civilian for the purposes of conducting hostilities, what conduct amounts to direct participation in hostilities, and what the precise modalities are according to which civilians directly participating in hostilities lose their protection against attack, are pressing issues that need to be addressed urgently. The protection of civilians from undue harm and the prevention of collateral damage, particularly the loss of human life, is one of the most essential and basic principles of IHL, but also a difficult one to implement. Given the nature of modern conflict and the theaters of combat moving to populated city centers, this problem is further exacerbated by the use of conscripted soldiers, particularly child soldiers, in some conflict areas. This is a practice that must be eradicated by any means possible, especially through the efficient prosecution of the perpetrators of such crimes in domestic or international criminal tribunal. This also leads us to the protection of human rights and the interplay between IHL and human rights. The protection of human rights has an overlapping sphere of interest with international human law. One of the oldest adages dating back to ancient Greece is that truth is the first casualty of war. However, it may be said that in the first 21st century, human rights are often the first casualty of war. We have always seen the suspension at best and outright violation at worst of human rights in time of emergency and conflict. The various rights that are accorded to all persons through the various human rights conventions and by the weight of customary international law are suspended in the name of security during times of strife. The balancing of security and freedom is indeed a tricky one, but this is all the more reason why close monitoring of the suspensions of rights and freedoms is necessary to ensure that violations do not occur. Among the most controversial examples of such instances are related to detention of suspects and prisoners. This is an area that merits a lot of debate and resolute action in order to curb the large-scale violation of rights. The fourth is in relation to multinational forces. As I mentioned before, one of the most interesting aspects of modern conflicts is the increased reliance on multinational peacekeeping forces. This is often necessary and useful, allowing armed international or multinational security forces to act as a buffer between combatants and to prevent unwanted hostilities. However, the use of such forces must also be carefully monitored and reasoned, and the legal framework enabling their operation must be rigorously examined to prevent the violation of basic sovereign rights of states and to ensure accountability. This also ties into the issues relating to the privatization of armed conflict. The integration of private contractors in military-related activities at national and international levels has proliferated considerably over the last 2 decades. Serious analysis of this area is often frustrated by a lack of agreement over what these private military companies or PMCs actually do, resulting in the idea that there is no commonly agreed definition of what constitutes a private military company or private security company. There exists a broad legal framework for the inclusion of PMCs in the UN peacekeeping forces within the laws applicable to the peacekeeping forces themselves, such as, for example, the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the UN and the Convention on the Safety of UN and Associated Personnel. However, as the use of private contractors increases in the military operation, there is a need for more specialized rules applicable to prevent any ambiguity in the classification of the rights and responsibilities of such organizations. There is also of particular relevance to those situations which don't directly involve the UN, such as security measures undertaken by private commercial organizations to protect their own commercial interests, which may be threatened by armed conflict. The next is in relation to cyber security to cyber attack. Now, as much as we appreciate the advent, the computer technology that help us to get closer to one another, so on and so forth, but at the same time, we are also troubled by the concept of this cyber terrorism and by extension, cyber warfare in general. And this is a hot button topic that needs examination and discussion. And I think not much that has been carried out at the moment by IGO like us, and we thought this is one area that we would like to delve into. And of course, as I said, we at the Secretariat, we are just a generalist, and we would expect expert coming from member state to at least come up with a framework, legal framework or guideline to help us to clear some of these ambiguities, because it would have serious implications on the jurisdictions, on in terms of enforcement. How do you enforce, for example, a person who has the knowledge of computer, but unfortunately prosecutors are not. You know, this is always the case. And what makes it worse is the judge not being educated in terms of getting the expertise in computer technology. So these are some areas that we thought ARGO should embark upon, and we will do that. And as much as the conflict is concerned, the armed conflict is concerned, what are the targeted areas? This is also very important. The control system, energy resources, finance, telecommunication, transportation, and water facilities. Now, we are so dependent on this thing. Now, I had this problem just yesterday and today. There is no network. I just couldn't call outside. But as I leave these premises, next to Mauritius or to Qatar Embassy, I have the line, the network. So you see how much we depend so much on this thing, and yet we do not know. We don't have the legal framework, preparation of legal framework, and this is very important. I think we will definitely look into this. Now, the other aspect, another pervasive topic which will no doubt be greatly illuminated over the course of this workshop, relate to the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, or colloquially called the drones, in theatre of combat. These modern weapons provide obvious advantages to their wielders, particularly with regard to protecting military personnel from dangerous and life-threatening situations. However, the use of these weapons also raises new ethical questions relating to both the modalities of their use as well as the side effect of their use. They will thus have to comply with, at a minimum, the IHR rules applicable to the conduct of hostilities, in particular those rules relating to precautions in attacks, distinctions, and of course, proportionality. and they must not employ weapons, the use of which is unlawful under IHL. And finally, law and practice. As I have mentioned before, the IHL framework is only as good as its recognition and implementation. In this respect, ALCO looks forward to the outcome of this workshop as a means of providing a roadmap indicating the best means of continuing to foster respect for and adherence to IHL. This workshop is but the latest of many joint programs held by ALCO and IOC over the last decade to disseminate information about IHL, and ALCO look forward to continuing its close partnership with the ICRC, and I have no doubt that this workshop will prove effective and informative in helping the two organizations continue to their work. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mohammed, for the overview of the ALCO Secretariat's interest in understanding more of the application of international humanitarian law to contemporary challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite Surinder Oberoi, Head of Communications for the ICRC Regional Delegation, in collaboration with Benjamin Warren, Deputy Head of ICRC Regional Delegation, to share the ICRC's role and mandate with you, and perhaps to make some points of convergence with the very relevant presentation of Professor Mohammed.
Thank you, Charles. Well, Secretary General has very rightly flagged some of the issues, the challenges which the modern world is presently facing. And of course, law and practice and diplomacy, as well as looking into the issues, how to resolve it, is their job. And for us, the International Committee of Red Cross literally is present at ground zero. We are usually present in the theater of conflict, theater of violence, theater of war, and literally have to be very close to both state actors, non-state actors. We have to diplomatically, as well as with our influence, and of course with our transparency and confidentiality, move forward to let them know, to allow us to the mandates which the world has given a responsibility to the International Committee of Red Cross. When I say responsibility, like as I'm sure in the morning sessions, there was much talked about the Geneva Conventions, and these Geneva Conventions, we have been asked to be, as a private organization, as an independent organization, to be the guardians. It's the confidence of all the states, all the people who believe in the humanity to trust us, and that is where we want to increase our trust, rather not to live in the quarters or in the compartment of the trust deficit. So for that, a lot of research is being done, both at the grassroots level as well as at our headquarters. Today, I'll quickly touch with some of the issues, who we are. It's very important for everyone to know something about the Red Cross. You know, I was first exposed to the Red Cross when I was a student in one of the schools in Kashmir, in Elbispo. When one of the deputy commissioners entered into our assembly and asked every student to contribute 1 rupee or 2 rupees for one of the floods which had happened far, far away from Jammu and Kashmir. And in response from our pocket money, which we could give to most of the deputy commissioner, who also happens to be in India as the district Red Cross chairperson, we were provided with some sort of a small Red Cross flag. And we proudly pinned it up. And I think after that, I did not encounter anything on the Red Cross. Then I joined journalism. And in journalism, I covered Kargil. And in Kargil war, which of course has still not been declared as a war, even though indirectly most of the countries, both the parties have accepted it. Believe me, and let me confess, I did not know what is international humanitarian law. If I would have known the international humanitarian law, the treatment of my stories would have been different. The treatment to the civilians who were literally being trampled by the two giants, or as it said, when the two elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And this is where we were not able to cover the civilians. We literally were covering only the facts and figures and the versions and the briefing of both the parties. On one side from the Pakistan and the other side from the Government of India's military. And that's one of the reasons I would say it's very important to know what is the role of each and every national society, the International Committee of Red Cross, the International Federation of Red Cross, which is, because a role has been given to them. That is the mandate and that is the mission which I'll be talking about, and my colleague will also answer about the operations. He has got a lot of operational experience from Sudan to India to Nepal and many other places around. And we all know that this organization is nearly 150 years old organization, and we were born in a battlefield. And battlefield, the Battle of Solferino, which is a famous one, which Mary Watts this morning mentioned about the book of Solferino, won the first Nobel Award also. And we are going to be 151-year-old soon. The memory of Solferino gave two ideas by a businessman who was crossing over and saw nearly 40,000 soldiers. Mind you, 40,000 soldiers and not even a single civilian in those days. That clearly means that troops were fighting far, far away from the civilian population. And this is one of the biggest concerns for the International Committee of Red Cross today. Like today, there are 50% of civilians who get casualties in any of the wars which are happening, or in any of the conflicts which are happening. Unlike in earlier days, in the First World War, there were only 10% of civilians. So, a relief committee was established, and rules how to govern the warfare were also looked into. There were 12 countries which came together. The signature of the first Geneva Convention was there, and the creation of Geneva Committee, which finally turned into the International Committee of Red Cross, was there. This is where the role was appreciated by the neighboring countries and started giving responsibility to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Now, International Committee of Red Cross, which has still the origin and headquarters in Geneva, kept on growing. The responsibilities kept on increasing, and this is where we started entering into different countries. And today we are present in more than 80 countries with a staff of 13,000 people across the globe. Now, this is where the responsibility had to be shared. We never wanted to duplicate the activities which would be with the ICRC or with the National Society, and that's where a thought process was taken up, and it was decided and passed that ICRC will look into the man-made disasters, the wars, the conflicts, wherever they are, and this is where they play the major role. And International Federation of Red Cross, before that I would say that national societies, there can be only one national society in each country according to the 7 principles of International Committee of Red Cross or the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And these national societies, to keep them together and to use each other's role in different areas, a federation was created. The recent example is the disaster which took place in Philippines. More than 50 national societies were being coordinated both by International Committee of Red Cross and International Federation of Red Cross. And thousands of people have been treated. Lots of relief work has been given to them. And this is how we work as a family together whenever need is required. So to coordinate between National Society and International Federation of Red Cross was established in 1919, and the job, of course, they take a lead role. That does not necessarily mean that they are the only ones who have to work. Of course, they will take some sort of a lead and they can ask any of the national societies or even the support of the International Committee of Red Cross. And we do meet after every 3 years, after every 2 years, after every 4 years in different capacities, in different meetings, in different forums to discuss, to pass the future protocols or laws which should be there. Now, for the presence of the Red Cross in a man-made disaster or even for areas where there is a conflict, it was very important to identify a particular person so that an immunity should be given. All the parties were ready to accept that, but how a person would be identified at ground zero or in a theatre of a conflict. And this was the origin of the Red Cross emblem. Now, Red Cross emblem does not have any religious connotations at all. But still it was seen because it was picked up from the reverse of the Switzerland flag. Many of the people doubted about the cross. So indirectly it had some sort of a thing, but this was simply an emblem so that it can identify a particular person or a building which could be created as a neutral zone where things can work. I can give you an example of Bangladesh. When Bangladesh was created, Hotel in Intercontinental was said to be a neutral zone which remained there as a neutral zone for several years, even after the formation of the Bangladesh also. So origin of Red Cross emblem is to identify so that it should not be attacked, and according to the Geneva Conventions and the law and the consent of most of the countries, all the countries, the immunity was given to the Red Cross workers that they should be allowed to work in these areas and they should not be touched. And if attacked, it's a tragedy. Now, reverse of the Swiss flag, and this was that we should have one single symbol across the globe so that it's identified easily. If you cross the boundaries, if you cross the borders, you remain the same in this identity. But still it was not acceptable. At the Ottoman Empire, wanted to have a crescent, and finally that crescent was also accepted. Now the third sign, which was in 2006 called as Red Crystal, the last three signs which you see are the acceptable according to the ICRC, 4 Geneva Conventions and 3 protocols which are there, which I'm sure my colleagues will be discussing on the international humanitarian law issues. This was simply to remove the confusion because most of the nations, most of the countries were using different signs. You can see it on this slide that different countries were using for their Red Cross or for their humanitarian organization different signs or emblem. So finally it was codified and unilateral things were there. Now who can use this Red Cross? There's a lot of abuse which is happening, and in every constitution, in every law, it's a punishable offense, including in the, if you look into the Indian Penal Code also, it's punishable. But members of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, as well as the medical units of the army, can only use these signs because they are the ones who literally work on the area. Other than that, no doctors, no ambulances, no private nursing homes, they cannot use it. WHO has given the 4 signs which are now being looked into. You have seen recently a major campaign taken by the Indian Red Cross Society, supported both by the International Committee of Red Cross and International Federation of Red Cross. We have been able to disseminate to most of the pharmaceutical shops, most of the hospitals, that which is the right sign which they should use. And it's happening, the change is happening. It might be slow, but it's happening across the South Asia. As I said, it should not be used, but still many a times the ambulances or the Red Cross signs have been used. Now we don't use weapons at all. There is no security forces with the International Committee of Red Cross when we are in the field. The only security or weapon which is with us is Red Cross. You'll find usually the stickers which are very much there on our vehicles where we don't allow combatants to be in it. Why? It's again for the confidentiality which we want to gain, and we also do not want, except there are 1 or 2 places where because of some of the reasons and security reasons where we do have the security, and I'm sure my colleague will mention about that thing also. Now mandated activities as far as these are concerned, again it's an independent private organization. many people confuse us that we are a part of WHO as a medical organization or a part of UN, which we are not. We are an international public service mission organization, and we continue to expand, having our headquarters, as I said earlier, in Geneva. And two things which we emphasize as far as our mission is concerned: the protection as well as the assistance. When I say protection, we mean that we have to do sometimes a preventive exercise as well as enter into an area. For example, we visit different jails, going into an agreement with different actors who are responsible in it and work on it. I'll give you some of those details in my next slide. But for all this, we try to be away from the media. We try to be away from our public speeches. We try to maintain the confidentiality. It's not that there is something secret which we have to. No, we are present in Jammu and Kashmir for the last nearly 20 years, but you hardly see us in the media. We are literally present in the jails. We do visit the detainees in those areas. Not only detainees who are related to Jammu and Kashmir, but also the ones who are arrested and posted outside Kashmir. But we never expose anyone's report to anyone, neither to the media nor to except the concerned persons who are there. Just to give you a rough idea of 2008, this is 900 millions, but presently we have got 1.3 billion total thing, and our priorities keep on changing depending on the situation. Now presently, our biggest operation is going on in Afghanistan as well as now in Syria, and we keep on changing as the things depend. You can call us that we are also more or less like a fire brigade. We don't wait for the money. We don't wait for that we have to first raise the money and then reach to the spot. We first reach to the spot and try to then ask our donors to donate some amount of money. And from where do we get the money? That's another big question. Most of the countries who are signatory to the Geneva Conventions, they pay us money. 90% of our budgets is from different countries. Most of the countries give us the budget, and then there are some private organizations also, which is like 5 to 7% who finance us for our projects. So far, we have been able to coop it up, but who knows how the finances are going to work in the future. But the fact remains, we keep on expanding, and maybe it's because the internal disturbances or the conflict which is also expanding. Now these are some of the slides where we have got different activities. We look into, as I said, in different jails. We also visit those jails. We also take the messages from the detainees to their families. Like last year, more than 500,000 messages were transferred from the detainees to their families and vice versa. I mean, you look into the quantity and the workforce which is required for visiting each and every country. For example, in Guantanamo Bay, where we were also present, we had to visit 22 countries to provide the letter or provide the messages to different families which were there. Feel free to ask questions to Benjamin, who's ready to answer after, if you have any queries which are there. And assistance, as I said, we all know that we have to look into it. Sometimes we have to create operation theaters in the field. This happened at a time when there was in 2005, I still remember that how different national societies literally came to the Pakistan administered Kashmir after the earthquake, where ICRC was present and playing a lead role. And field camps were created. The Italian Red Cross doctors especially flew up there. There were more than 30 to 40 helicopters which were sent to that particular spot. And also, the exercise which we are doing it here is more or less like a preventive. We want to spread the dissemination, what Mary and the Secretary General said in the morning, that we need to disseminate. We ask people to know about us, who we are, or what is international humanitarian law. We talk to all the actors who are present. That might be the combatants from any side, or the school children where we have introduced some of the programs called as. So this is how we cooperate with different agencies, with different Red Crosses to work around. Just to give you an example, in Malaysia, we have a regional delegation which opened in Kuala Lumpur in 2001. And this keeps on supporting the East and Southeast Asia Pacific in promoting humanitarian law. And also in India, we were present in the First World War. We were present in 1971-65 as well as 1947-48. So our roles, look into the prisoners of war who were in one of the camps in the Pakistan, and that time in one of the Pakistan area. Of course, that was in British India that time. And in Jammu and Kashmir, we started our operations, a memorandum of understanding with the government of India for a limited work only in the jails was in 1995. And we have some consultants from different people who go to the security forces for dissemination. We also try to reach to different universities. We have got some experts. We are trying to introduce international humanitarian law to as many universities as possible, and we have some experts in our delegation who are our colleagues. We also work with some school children, trying to bring them the basics of the humanity which is required. We work with journalists and also cooperate with the Indian Red Cross Society. I think I should stop here and allow my friend to speak about some operations and practical experiences which he had in Sudan and other places.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make one or two remarks to thank the Secretary General for his presentation. I think this was a very good presentation that gave a complete overview of the challenges that we face today in terms of international humanitarian law, and I completely share your analysis that me and the ICRC, as a representative of the ICRC, we share your analysis that the fundamental principles that are enshrined in international humanitarian law, they're there and they're good. What is really the issue today is to make sure that these fundamental principles are respected and adhered to, given the new challenges that you outlined in such a good way, to make sure that these fundamental principles, which for us remain completely valid, there shouldn't be a debate about those, but to make them respected and to come up with new conventions if necessary, to make sure new technology, new challenges, new ways of fighting wars, new ways of how armed violence manifests itself in different parts of the world, really adhere to these fundamental principles. So I thank you very much for this good presentation. I wanted to also underline for me it's a great honor to be here with ALCO and to share, we share with you this role, you call it just an advisory body. I really go against the just because I think it's an incredibly important role to be an advisory body. We share with you the same view that really the decisions lie with member